now we're going to sort of move into talking about the novel itself. And here's an important question for anybody who reads novels. What happens to history and experience when it becomes a novel? In other words, there are two ways that Conrad could have approached this. He could have said, well, you know, terrible things are happening in the Congo, so I'm going to write a book about it. I'm going to expose everything that King Leopold is doing. In fact, if I can find it, I have a book that you might want to read if you're interested. Came out not long ago, which does just that. It's Adam Hochschild's book, King Leopold's Ghost, in which he explores in great detail all of the horror of what was going on in the Congo. One of the things that he says about Conrad, he has a whole chapter on Conrad, one of the things that he says about him is that he would really like for Heart of Darkness to be about the Congo. And he would like for it to just focus on that. I'm not sure that Conrad does that. What Conrad does is he takes great care to sort of set the novel in the Congo, but then he removes all the details, right? You can't really tell what company he keeps talking about. You can't really tell what government he's talking about. He sort of dislocates it, and that's what the novelist has the freedom to do. It's dislocated from time and place. Now, this is one of the novels that people have reprinted again and again and again. It's one of those novels that many, many high school students read, many, many college students read, many, many English professors talk about. And often when they talk about it, they don't say a whole lot about the Congo. They say a lot about a lot of other things that are going on in the novel. So one of the things that Conrad was interested in doing was sort of pulling back from these specific details, the specific historical details, and dealing with the novel from the standpoint of human experience. What does it tell us about human experience? The other thing that happens to the novel is it goes out in the world and sort of lives, especially if it's an important novel like this one. You don't have any control over it, right? If it lasts longer than the author does, then it is subjected to criticism from new generations, right? The criticism I just gave you from the Nigerian writer Tebi. That's what happens to novels when they hang around a long time. People spend a lot of time talking about them. One of the famous stories about William Faulkner is that he was walking down the street in New York City one day and he stopped in front of a bookstore and he saw a biography of Dickens, and he shakes his head and he says, I sure hope they don't do that to me. I don't want anybody writing about my life. How many biographies are there on Faulkner? Good gracious, there's so many of them, and everything he did has been exposed. So that's what the novelist, and he did some nasty stuff. That's why the novelist, that's the sort of risk the novelist has to take. And the novel, because the novel then becomes a part of culture. But there's a problem. Novels are never written out of certainty. This is what I said at the beginning. They grow out of questions, nagging doubts, obsessions with the unknown. Readers are left to sort things out, and we cannot do that without applying the novel to ourselves. In fact, that is what we are called upon to do. Now, this is a novel, if we put this into the historical context of novel writing, this novel would be characterized as early modernism. Modernism grows out of a lot of the late 19th century turmoil that is created by figures such as these. Darwin, Origin of Species, which is 1856. Karl Marx, Das Kapital. Sigmund Freud, Interpretation of Dreams, 1899. So, and you could even, modernism, of course, is also affected by Einstein's theory of relativity, which became, I think, 1913, is it, or 1910, something along that. So this whole time period is a time when people are beginning to feel very uncertain about everything that's going on around them, right? Freud, wasn't it Freud who said, and I'm just sort of paraphrasing this, so I might be getting it wrong, but I think Freud said there were 3 great blows to man's ego. One was Galileo, who told us we were not the center of the universe. The second was Darwin, who told us we didn't know where we came from. And the third was Freud, who told us we didn't know who we were. Freud was rather arrogant to think he was one of the great blows to man's ego. But what he's getting at there, of course, is this sort of uncertainty that people began to feel. Now, the way this becomes reflected in literature is the exterior of the novel becomes very ambiguous. The reader is called upon to put things together. Because according to the novelist, that's the way reality is. Everybody is called upon to sort of piece together existence, piece together reality, right? And Conrad is one of the early writers who begins to do this. And one of the novels in which he does this with great skill is Heart of Darkness. There's a great deal of ambiguity in Heart of Darkness. What to focus on in Heart of Darkness? This is an archetypal story. And what that means is this is a story that is so ingrained in human consciousness that we tend to tell it over and over again, right? And that's not because Conrad told it. That's because it's something we keep going back to. This is the journey into the underworld, right? Which you find in all the great epics. The journey into the space where you've never been. You can also compare it to all of those stories about what was called during this time period going native, meaning you go and live with the Indians and you become an Indian. That phrase, if you've seen the movie Dances with Wolves, the main character in Dances with Wolves is accused of going Indian, right? So the whole idea of sort of going back to something or finding something out there in the wild that speaks to something inside you, that tells you something about yourself, and suddenly you find a connection to it. So, it's a kind of archetypal story that haunts us, right? The journey that you come back from, but you're never the same again, right? Secondly, Marlowe is a narrator, a man of the sea and a storyteller. He tells the story to fellow sailors looking out on the Thames. Is he a reliable narrator? Now, this is a just vital question to know. How many of you are storytellers? Just about everybody? No? Just a few people? How many of you know storytellers? I come from 3 generations of preachers. They're all storytellers. You know, my dad would get a gleam in his eye. Yeah. Remember that?